Along South Africa's coastline, big oil companies are staking their claims. They're lining up to look for oil.
That is said to be a game changer for the economy of the country.
Something is there.
Oil, they say it makes the world go round. South Africa has never been known as a major oil producer, but that could all soon change. Major international oil companies are now exploring this country's coastlines for what could be vast reserves of oil. That could have an impact on the way we live in South Africa and the way this country works. It's been known for a long time that the country may be sitting on some major oil reserves. It's just been a matter of getting to them. And with the oil price riding high, various global players are now spending a fortune to drill in our seas. Shell has optioned the west coast. Total is drilling near George, and ExxonMobil has plans to explore off Durban. Government is confident of some good news.
We are hoping to strike gas or oil down there in South Africa. If we do succeed, that is said to be a game changer for the economy of the country and maybe the subcontinent. The experts suggest that we have a very good chance. That's why this investment has come here. It suggests that they've got a reason to come here. They wouldn't come if they had not assessed the situation.
More and more oil companies have their sights set on South Africa.
I'm aware that there is a lot, about 4 or 5 of them, that are lining up as we speak.
Geologists say oil reserves to the north of us in places like Angola suggest oil may also be found here. Much of the exploration is focused on what's called the Orange Basin, a deep-sea extension of the Karoo.
It costs a tremendous amount of money to explore in these offshore deep water basins. So, they obviously have got a geological model that they think says something is there. There's been a lot of work, for example, in the Orange Basin over the years. There's been a number of seismic lines and many episodes of exploration offshore. But until now, there hasn't really been any good finds. But hopefully with this move into the deeper water, there may be something out there.
To understand South Africa's oil rush, you first have to look north to the rest of Africa. For the past 10 years or so, there's been an oil rush like wildfire across the continent as international oil companies have been spreading out and finding vast resources on the continent. Emerging democracy and more stable legislation has made this possible, and there's been huge discoveries in places like Uganda, Angola, and even Mozambique. Now, this brings us back to South Africa, where the major oil companies have just arrived on our shores and are looking for our oil. South Africa's oil rush is not just about oil here, but reaches beyond our borders. Former governor of the Reserve Bank, Tito Mboweni, now chairman of an oil exploration company, sees oil as key to the African Renaissance.
So we're not just looking at South Africa, we're not just a South African company, we're a Pan-African oil and gas company. That is the story. Now, if you have that perspective in mind beyond the squatter camp, then you can begin to talk about the African Renaissance. Now, the oil and gas space has been a sad tragedy for Africa, in that you've got big companies from outside Africa who have grown and become big based on the resources in Africa. When these Africans have been snoozing, and so we can't snooze. The future generations will look badly on us if they say, but where were these timers? When all of these things were happening, where were they?
But looking for oil off South Africa's shores is not easy.
One of the challenges in South Africa are the rough seas that you get in the Atlantic Ocean. So typically what happens is when you take a rig to go and drill offshore, obviously when the weather is very bad and you've got a lot of waves, then you stop drilling until the weather improves. So one of the challenges is obviously the weather. And with rig contracts, what happens is you will pay a daily fee. So whether you're drilling or not, you will still pay. So the biggest challenge really is the weather. But the other challenge is the fact that South Africa is remote from other oil and gas producing countries.
The world of deepwater oil exploration is a relatively new one. 20 years ago, this kind of exploration would not have even been possible. The question is, does the South African government have the means, the resources and the will to make sure that international oil companies are doing their jobs properly and are following proper safety procedures where they're drilling in the waters off our coast? If you think of the Deepwater Horizon disaster off the Gulf of Mexico, think of the size of that disaster. If it were to happen here, it would be an absolute catastrophe. The Deepwater Horizon disaster happened when drillers struck oil deep under the sea. The well exploded and vast amounts of oil leaked into the ocean. Because the well was so deep, it took months before the leaking hole could be capped.
South Africa is expanding offshore drilling, and we can see from the map that the government is providing on the number of permits that are being issued to various multinationals. It's quite extensive. It looks like this is going to be a massive expansion. So the possible risks are, of course, there could be leakages, explosion like we had for Deep Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico. So the risks are substantial, depending, it could be a once-off large event, or it could be something that we don't see in the present, but in the long term there could be other risks because of compliance issues and so on.
Fakir says we need to introduce legislation to protect ourselves from potential environmental damage.
Our legislation is not up to date, based on international standards and the learnings we're getting from Deep Horizon. And I think there's a recognition of that.
The country could be on the verge of something big. A major oil discovery could change the face of the economy and generate some desperately needed international capital. Mungo Poa, Johannesburg.
You deserve to know more.
ENCA.com